Welcome to Unbound. You're here for conscious chats that go deeper than your Instagram feed, where we ditch the dogma but keep it real. So let's get unbound. It's so nice when we don't have an hour of tech issues before beginning, isn't it? Like it just feels like
we're coming in so calm. This is just
I just
so
feel
relaxed.
like it's so enjoyable. I'd do a lot more of those if I didn't have to play with tech. No, I'm grateful that we have it. We couldn't even be doing this.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm delighted that it's there. It's really nice when we're all on the same page. You know?
Yeah, and we start at the start time, not an hour and a half later.
We do.
Like, that really helps with just the overall scheduling. We really had to dig deep on the staying power last week.
Yeah, we did. You know, and it's nice to be dynamic. It's nice to be adaptable, but we don't want to exercise it every single time.
No, it's not my preference. But, we need it, we can go there.
And I think that we demonstrated that we're more than capable of that. So the lesson, I think, has been learned. The assignment has been handed in.
Yeah, complete. A+.
That's how it works.
A+, done.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Well, I can't wait to get unbound again.
We're just getting more and more unbound every week that goes by.
So loose I can barely keep my particles together.
Well, speaking of keeping your particles together, what I wanted to talk about this week was actually a topic that came up in one of my other containers, and I wanted to share it with you and with everyone that's listening because it was a really powerful conversation. And that was a 15-minute conversation, and this one we'll be able to go a little bit deeper. But one of my students asked, what is the impact of the stories that we're telling us, and are they causing us stress, and how can we start to tell ourselves a different story? And I think that it's really important to be examining the storylines that you've bought into, the narrative that you've bought into about yourself and about your life, because that is one of the most limiting factors that you're going to find. The difference between those who are moving forward in life and achieving the things that they want to and those that feel like they aren't. Some of it has to do with what's relevant and letting go and really coming into your own lane of what your own journey is about. But also some of it has to do with just the incapacity to move beyond the story, that I can't, that I'm not enough, that couldn't happen for me. And those are the breakthrough points where we really start to shed those layers, is where we really start to step into full dharma, into full purpose, and be able to move forward and fulfill the vision, fulfill the potential. And so we're going to be ultimately pushed up against those growth barriers, and this episode might serve a little bit to take us there.
Yeah. I think it's so relevant. And when we talked about this topic, because we did talk in advance briefly about this topic,
about half an hour ago.
It's a whole new day for us, Georgia. And you're like, think of a story that we can tell. But I'm like, but all of the stories that I can tell can come right back to, if I peel that onion away, I'm not enough. And it doesn't matter if it's a story about being in a relationship. It doesn't matter if it's a story about finances or about work or about being a parent. If I peel back the surface story that I'm telling, underneath it, at the very bottom, it comes back to I'm not enough. And when I get in that place where I'm like wound up or overwhelmed or insecure, or I'm just triggered and activated, then I call it like the mixtape, like putting in the mixtape, that old mixtape that you've made for yourself years and years and years ago. It's on cassette because it was that long ago that I made it, putting the mixtape, and that's the mixtape that comes ultimately as that story.
Yeah, and it never really goes away. The tape is actually always in the machine, and then it's always playing, and then you, in those moments, are turning the volume up loud, because this is ultimately, we can't come back to that storyline if it doesn't exist anymore in our consciousness. So it's really interesting because it gets quieter. Okay, things are going well. There's no direct trigger to really draw my attention to what my underlying circuitry is in the moment. But then something happens, and then that storyline comes online really hard. So it has to already be existing, pre-existing. It has to already be within the system for it even to get turned on. So it's really interesting. And what's useful is that you have this one, let's say, baseline thread, this one flavor of storyline that you can really clearly identify. Okay, so for me, it's that I'm not enough. We look at the impact of, let's start there, of what these stories are actually doing. When we think about the universe and the mechanics of everything that exists, even from a quantum mechanics, quantum physics perspective, which is the most sophisticated form of science that we have at this point in time, though still really only touching the surface of what the Veda, that body of wisdom about the universal mechanics that was essentially downloaded and witnessed and been made aware of within the yogis, sages, seers, was able to expound. We're still miles away from that, but getting a little bit closer with quantum mechanics. But what quantum mechanics tells us is that it's an expectation-driven universe. And we talked about this a little bit in season 1, where when a probe is put into, let's say it's an electron probe, is put into a vacuum, an electron appears. So what does that mean? If you have an expectation, your probe is carrying this expectation everywhere you go that I'm not enough, that I'm not enough. It means that obviously on a perception basis, you're going to be seeing and gathering evidence for that storyline. So anything that happens, unless it happens to be flowing in a way that doesn't trigger that, but anything that doesn't perhaps feel so good or doesn't go your way or it just goes in a direction that you weren't expecting or that wasn't your preference, then there's a perception that that event, you're making meaning of that event, and that event now means I'm not good enough. And so then what we have is, secondary to the perception is a contraction of your energy. So when you have the thought right now, like if you were to feel into it right now, I'm not good enough, we can feel perhaps a shrinking on the level of the heart, a contraction. Even the shoulders might dip a little bit, like there's a little bit of tension that might come into the heart. There's a contraction in the system. It's a deflation. So versus the thought, I am enough, I'm wonderful, it has more of an outward expansive feeling to it. Now, the problem comes where there's been this whole, back in the 80s, affirmations, were quite a big thing. Look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself, I love you, I love you, I love you. The problem is that when the underlying circuitry is much stronger, it's much more baked in. So let's say I'm not good enough is running very strong, because when did that first get absorbed? At a very absorptive time in your early childhood. We find you now in your early 40s. And so that's been baked in for a long time. So to just tell yourself I'm good enough, why would that not change? If you said that every day 100 times, I'm good enough, I'm good enough, I'm good enough, it still won't be enough, ironically, because the underlying circuitry is stronger. So when we're going to have this polarity is not actually how we come out of releasing the underlying narrative. So that narrative is having so much impact. It's having an impact on the way that you perceive your life is going, that then builds evidence and actually reinforces and strengthens that circuitry, that programming, that storyline, that narrative that you're holding. Then it's causing stress. So that contraction is a stress response. So stress is response to stimulus. Not everyone would have a stress response to, let's say, an event, where it's an event in life where someone said one comment, which is really based on, when someone says anything, it's based on their state of consciousness. It's based on their narratives, their own storylines that they're running about what is good and bad in the world and how they see themselves is then projected onto how they see others. So when someone says something actually isn't really about us, there might be a learning there. But that learning or that inspiration or that change in behavior that may be inspired by that feedback that's given or advice or a comment, that can happen without the contraction. So the contraction is actually the unaligned part of that sequence of events. So contracting and making meaning out of what is simply some feedback, some critique that's actually supporting you, perhaps to be more masterful in a particular area of life. Say it's a piece of feedback about your work or your business, or, even the way that we're interacting with human dynamics from partners. Often that causes a huge amount of stress because it's based on, our worth, our acceptability, which there will be a lot of storylines there about whether we're acceptable, whether we're too much, whether we're not enough, whether we're a burden, whether we're, our energy's too big, we're too outspoken. There can be so many different layers and storylines there. So of course it's prickly. It's like walking on a minefield. You're going to trigger all these different minds just by a partner saying one thing. And they're actually, having their own experience on the one side, but they're also the person that's really best placed to give you the type of feedback and support and growing and expanding beyond your own blind spots and starting to see through some of these narratives than any other person. But we're so resistant to it often because it sets off the landmine. So these storylines that we're carrying, they are causing us stress. If we continue to maintain that, then there is a lessening of heart energy. That's one of the strongest energetic systems that we have, is the heart center. It's really associated with life force. Of course, when we think about even the organ that sits behind the heart chakra, the heart, huge part of our overall ecosystem. So that kind of stress over time, and if we continue to reinforce and we don't break through it and challenge it, it can cause a lot of stress, which then can manifest into health problems. So there's often a link between the energetic center where we're holding stress. So if it's something that we're holding about, our value, our worth, it might be in the heart. If it's something that we're holding about our expression or being able to speak or our words carrying value, we might be holding it in the throat chakra. We can then end up manifesting disease or illness, or even just lack of energetic flow. So we're not able to feel the full flow of that universal life force that's available to us because of this constriction. So it's having so many impacts. And then an even deeper one than that, which is another level that's worth looking at, is we start to react and our behavior starts to be driven by these underlying patterns, these underlying storylines. So I'm not good enough is holding you back from doing certain things. In life, you're holding back from doing the thing because you think I won't be good enough at that, so I just won't even do it. That can be a huge barrier for people. Or in a relationship, if you're thinking I'm going to get rejected or no one will ever want me, whatever it might be, there's an abandonment issue there. There's a storyline around the abandonment, which was meaning that that your ego structure made of a certain set of experiences that you had as a child. When we look back with clarity, we can see, well, that was actually just how my parents were showing up. That, again, was their state of consciousness on display, which is a result of all the experiences they've had. It's a result of their own upbringing. It's a result of the stress and environment and collective consciousness that was there at the time, the knowledge and tools that they had, which again has shifted quite dramatically for this next generation. So when we look at it with clarity, we can see that meaning didn't need to be taken on board, but that's what the system does at those early developmental levels. And so now we're literally trying to get towards situations where we feel we can be accepted, where we can feel wanted, where we can feel good enough. And there can be a sort of sense of, now I'm going outside of my natural, authentic self in order to prove myself. I'm saying things in order to get people to think I'm good enough. For example, I'm not saying necessarily you're doing this, but these are the types of behaviors that will get driven at certain stages of evolution by these underlying storylines. So, we might not even go into a relationship because we're too afraid that we're going to get rejected, so we just won't have a relationship at all. And so that's a huge limiting piece in our life. Or we're interacting with someone, but we're actually setting up the conditions whereby they will actually reject us. They may not have if we'd been able to communicate or to trust the process or to ask a question with curiosity rather than judgment, or, we pulled out and pulled away straight away because they said something that we then made meaning that is based on that underlying circuitry. So it impacts everything. So it's so important that we're paying attention to, like you said, in those moments, what is the storyline? What is the tape that's playing? What is my tape saying? And when we can start to get a little bit of clarity around that, oh, okay, I'm running this storyline, I'm not good enough, there's going to be a huge part of you that doesn't want to let go of that storyline either. That's why the I'm good enough doesn't land, or I'm wonderful doesn't land. It doesn't resonate. And so there's a part of you that wants to hold on to it. So we have to explore it with some curiosity, challenge the assumption, well, is it true that I'm not good enough? And if we take that to a spiritual perspective, or from the spiritual perspective, you're a divine expression of creative intelligence. Once you really know and are experiencing the full layers of everything that can be experienced inside your system, you can't actually know yourself as anything other than that. So that means that every storyline that is not in alignment with, I'm an expression of universal intelligence, I'm an expression of divine intelligence, I'm of value just innately because of my being, because of the fact that I exist. It doesn't mean that I'm not refining or growing. Those are all wonderful things. But anything that doesn't match up to that is a learned storyline. It's not who you really are. It's a perception that can be shifted, that can be let go of. And really, as we continue to progress and evolve on our spiritual path, as we continue to evolve into our total potential, what that involves is letting go of all the false storylines, letting go of anything that isn't in alignment with life-affirming, expansive, which really is that ultimate vision of I am an expression of divine intelligence, not in an egoic way where, I'm beyond reproach, like I can do no wrong. That's the spiritualized ego. It's more, I know at my deepest level what I really am. And so therefore these storylines, when this tape comes on, I'm not going to entertain it. I'm not going to give it a lot of energy. I'm not going to allow it to continue to run. And so I'm going to do the work that involves dissolving it at the baseline so that I can be free to be my authentic expression and to see and receive and experience life from a position of true clarity rather than this lens that I've been coloring everything with, the not good enough lens, the abandonment lens, the rejection lens, the I'll never be wanted lens, whatever it might be.
So how does it, you think about doing the work and having all the tools and, I've been doing that stuff for a long time, but under certain, with certain triggers, under certain stresses, the mixtape, gets turned up again. And I'm like, well, what does it serve us to hold on to it so tight? What is it actually doing for us that it makes it so sticky and tricky to let go of? Because why do we think on some level that it's serving us to hold on to that story, to keep ourselves small in that way?
It's really interesting. We have to kind of explore, and I really recommend, questioning with curiosity and compassion, the part of you that wants to hold on to that storyline. So when you go in, you're like, right, I know what the storyline is. Let's say it's I'm not good enough. You're going to find that there's part of you that's sort of gripping onto it, because you can be free of it in any moment, ultimately. So why are you not free of it yet? There's part of you that's still buying into it, that believes it to be true. Maybe not the adult linear part, but there is a really strong foundational part, the inner child, a part of your consciousness structure that is so invested and identified with that storyline because it's so habitual, because it's so baked in, because it was reinforced at such an impressionable time that it doesn't want to let go of it. It doesn't want to allow for other narratives that might come in, more actual truth, that you are enough just as you are. It wants to keep proving itself because it keeps that ego structure alive. The ego structure is all about difference, better and worse. And so we're constantly doing things to make ourselves be or appear better, and then, or dropping into I'm not good enough, I'm the worst, and we're sort of pushing ourselves up and down on that spectrum. But what allows us to transcend that ego structure is love. Love really is the healing vibration. Love is unity, love is space, love is total acceptance, and love is beyond that baseline supreme love, is beyond the polarity. So where there is not good enough, there will be I'm good enough, back and forth. Where we can find that healing places through love. So what does that mean in a practical sense? Because, love, very good. but still, what happens when that person says that thing? It means that we need to go back to that part of ourselves, which is just such a powerful and easy practice that anyone can do at home. It's just choosing to, in that moment. So first step is seeing the storyline. Second step is stepping back from the storyline. Okay, I see it in front of me. Now that it's not who I am and a deeply embedded truth. It is something that's circuitry that's running, but I'm seeing it as a storyline in front of me. I've separated it from myself, which is why understanding it is a storyline. It's a narrative that you've bought into through knowledge and wisdom like this is very powerful, because once we've got a bit of space between us and the storyline, then we can start to work with it. That's when we have the space to release it. When it's still, I am that idea. It is me. It's my identity. It's all, you can't separate it from yourself. You can't delete it from yourself unless you can see it as separate. So that separation process is very important. And then there might be part of you that wants to kind of go into this familiar, I like to call it the old slipper, the grotty old slipper that really should have been thrown out. It's got that sort of fur on the inside that's getting a little bit scummy, but it's so comfortable, right? So it's this comfort. It's very interesting. And when you actually look at it, it's sort of comfortable to go into that habit of like the contraction and the heart, like collapsing, and the sense of, I'm not good enough. The storyline, the tape plays so easily, it's just like your favorite tune. Boom, on. Oh yeah, I know all the words to this song. Right. Wants to go in that slipper because it's comfortable, it's habitual, it's the known, it's what you've known. It's far more uncomfortable, and it challenges a huge part of what is currently running in your system. So part of your structure, it challenges a huge part of that to step outside and to be like, no, I'm going to challenge this assumption. No, I am going to move forward in this direction despite this circuitry being there. That is the challenge. That is keeping your foot out of the slipper, on the ground, grounded, separating that narrative from yourself in front of you. And this takes a bit of willpower because it's so easy to slip. What's going to be the most effortless path in that moment? It's actually not the path of most clarity or the path that's going to make you feel the best or give you the best outcome, the outcome that you really want. It's the most comfortable. The most comfortable, effortless path is just to slip into the old and just spend a little bit of time there, me. I'm not good enough. Now I cry on the couch. I might have a bowl of ice cream and watch my favorite movie. And this is like this whole setup. Whatever you do in that moment, maybe you drink something, maybe you eat things, maybe you call a friend and talk about it and bemoan it, rather than just being out of it. It's so much faster, but it's going to take willpower. So we have to develop that spiritual willpower. It's a very important part of being on that path of greater evolution and greater alignment and moving towards a state of greater light. Is we have to have the will to choose something different that's uncomfortable, that's not the known, to take the foot back. The foot wants to go towards the slipper. It's like, no, we're pulling it back. And in doing that, we can then make a different choice. And so now we've separated it. It's sitting in front of us. And this has happened. Something's happened to you. It's been said. You want to put the foot in the slipper, but you're choosing not to. Then this is where the real work takes place. Is like, okay, now I've got to go in and check in on that part of me that first absorbed this idea. And you might get a sense of just that part of you. There might just be a felt sense. There might be an image. There might be a time. There might be an age. It doesn't really need to have any of those things. The intention is powerful enough. You're working with yourself. You've got full access to any part of yourself if you combine intention with will. So that intention and willpower comes in, and then you intend to experience that part of you, and you might get a sense, okay, that part of me is, I can feel like it's quite strong. The feeling state of that contraction will feel activated. It'll feel stronger. That's good. That means you've made contact with that part. And then this is the time where you show up almost like a guardian angel to yourself. We call this in the Vedic tradition re-inspiring the past, which is in Western psychology called inner child work. There is a lot that can be malleable within the consciousness state. The events obviously cannot be changed, but response to the events, there's a huge amount of range for malleability and reprogramming in that. So experiencing that part of you, what were you experiencing at that time at those earliest stages? And maybe there's a parent there, maybe they've said certain things, maybe they're modeling certain things. You don't need to necessarily be aware of those, though they may come up. In that moment, you're giving your younger self, or that part of you that's holding on to that storyline because it's so invested in it, because it believes it to be true based on these strong experiences, giving that part love and compassion that they didn't receive at the time. They were being told certain things or modeled things, or the parents were stressed and were ignoring, and that the child needed a little bit more reassurance then. So you can show up as that person for yourself and offering that love and really letting that part of you know that there was never anything wrong with them. I mean, look at a child. There's not anything wrong there. There's just parents being stressed and making judgments based on their own stress, projection. So the child isn't doing anything wrong. At worst, the child is learning. Maybe they put the hand in the fire. Well, could we say that wrong? Only, really it's just a learning experience, and probably quite a powerful one. The innocence, the purity of the child there's nothing wrong with the child. There's just an environment, there's certain set of circumstances, context that the child is, through that ego structure, making meaning of. So if you're experiencing that part of you, giving them love and letting them see that, showing them images of the parents, the stress that they were under, now that you're the adult, more evolved self, you might have your own children. You know what it's like to be raising children, working, worried about finances, all the things, plus, the parents' own traumas that they've experienced from their childhood. So when you can show that to the child and start to kind of educate them in that inner space, let them see, let them know it was never about them. It was really a reflection of what the parents themselves were doing, and giving so much love. What they need, what everyone needs, is just more love. But we're trying to get it outside. So ultimately, it's all about love. In that moment, when someone says something to you, the critique about work, whatever it might be, what you're really looking for when you contract is the opposite of that, is you wanted praise, you wanted to feel good, you wanted the acceptance, you wanted the approval. So instead of trying to seek it from the person, because they're well within their rights to share their opinion or their view, you can decide what you do with that. But the part of you that's come online is this part that's making meaning of it again in that pattern. So where does the love need to go? To that part. And that is the healing vibration that dissolves the storyline. And really giving love to that part of you will create an opening in a space, because love is spacious. An opening in a space for a softening and a letting go of the narrative. So just speaking to yourself in your head in the adult place, that's not where the stress is stored. So telling yourself, no, I am good enough. No, it doesn't matter. People can go back and forth in their mind like this for hours. It's a waste of time. Honestly, you'll spend far too long in that cycle. So sometimes people mistake, to your question, well, we're doing all the work. Sometimes people mistake that for the work. No, I'm correcting it. I'm thinking about it. I am challenging it, but we're not going deep enough. So sometimes it's not, am I doing the work? Is am I doing the right work? Am I doing the most effective thing in that moment? Or am I doing a lot of work in lots of different areas, but perhaps this one, I haven't spent enough time with that part of myself. I haven't committed enough. There's been a lot of periods where my level of commitment to this kind of process within myself has been absolute. Like everything that comes up in the day, I may not be able to do it at the time, but in the evening before I go to bed, my practice has been, not so much recently, but at times where I was really working through a lot of these layers, has been to process everything that came up, if there's any residual emotion of any kind, and to check in to see what's there and what is the source of that, and to go in. So it needs to be something that you keep on your radar, because we can kind of drop it like, oh, I felt something, but then I just move forward and I'm fine. That's great, but it's going to keep coming. So the next level is, okay, I'm done with the storyline. I actually don't want to experience it at all. When you have that sense of deserving power, that knowingness that I can be free of this, is when it all starts. So there's sort of sometimes this part of you, because it's been so baked in, because you've experienced it so much, the trigger, the contraction, all of the results of that, there's almost part of you that's expecting that to continue as well. Doesn't know what life is like without that storyline running at all. So that's the possibility that I want you to start, everyone that's listening, to move your attention towards. What if I was free of this completely? Because once we have that as a possibility, then that intention is starting to move all of our action in that direction, which means that we will feel inspired to do this kind of process in the moment or on the day, or even once a week, just catch up on a couple of things that happened, or even just when something powerful happens and it's very present. Okay, what is the need of the time then? It's calling for you to heal it. It's not calling you for you to avoid it. It's not calling for you to talk to 10 people about it. It's calling for you to go in within and claim that higher deserving, which is I deserve to be free of this completely. And I will stop at nothing for that to happen. Like if you really want it, like we were talking about last week, it takes a certain willpower. The will has to be cultivated. The will is cultivated through the opening of potential possibility of so that question itself, what would it feel like to be completely free of this circuitry? And you'll feel like, you can feel that in your system. Like if I just feel into what does that feel like? Wow, that feels amazing. That feels so open, so light, so expansive. I'm not spending a lot of time thinking about what people said or didn't say or things that came up. Of course, these triggers and storylines create a lot of thinking. They clog up the system with a lot of unnecessary thinking because it's a stress response. So that creates activity in the nervous system, which creates activity in the mind. Free of that is just clarity, receptivity, enjoyment, taking on board what comes up and moving forward with it without the stress, without the contraction. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And I've had some thoughts. I'll work through a couple of comments first and then a question. One was I think as you were talking, I sort of had a bit of a realization about like how this gets baked in so hard, because, and listen, this is just a theory of mine. Do your own homework. When you're a baby and a little toddler, like there's a time when they do not understand that they are separate entities from the parent. So like if there's like negative feedback from the parent in that time, like there's a part of that child that thinks that negative feedback is actually part of them. So and I don't know if this is true, this is just a theory as I say, but like they're essentially getting this negative feedback from what they on some level understand to be self. So then it just seems like then that would bake in so hard.
And even at older stages where the understanding that there is separation is there, but the parents are like gods. They are the source of your survival. So the survival instinct is very strong at that time because human children are just completely helpless. They can't, it takes years for a child to become self-sufficient to actually survive on its own in the wild. We're talking like you've probably got to be 7, 8, 9, and that would probably be an advanced child. That's a long time. So anything that the parents say, they can essentially withdraw food, shelter, the basic warmth, the basic survival mechanisms that we need. So what they say and do is everything in a child's world because of this. It's not a mental process, it's a survival-based process. So what the child then starts to do is adapt to what are children are incredibly responsive to facial expression. So they watch the facial expressions and what the parent does, where there's a look of disdain. Maybe they didn't even say it, but the look, the energy, they can feel the energy. There's also a deep absorption that goes on because their energy is very open. They're very sensitive and receptive. So they can feel not just what the parent is saying. And this is, I think, one of the evolutions that we've had in parenting between the last generation and these generations moving forward is it's not just what you are saying, it's what you're feeling. They can feel what you're feeling. So when you say, no, I'm fine, they feel you're not fine. And so, the latest parenting is to share with the child, be more open, validate their fine level of feeling. What are you doing? You're shutting down their intuition in that moment. You're making them doubt themselves. So they become, it's almost like a little bit of a form of gaslighting, right? Because it's like the child can sense that. So, mummy, are you okay? And you can say, I am okay, but I'm a little bit sad, or mummy's a bit tired, or something like that, is validating their fine level of feeling. They can pick up on so much. So I think in previous generations were like, oh, they don't know that, they don't feel that, just what we tell them is enough. Whereas they're picking up on everything from the energy to the facial to what you're doing, not just what you're saying. Like parents that used to say, that old, do as I say, not as I do. That's absolutely irrelevant. They're going to be doing what you're doing, how you're showing up. So some of it, when you go in and check in on that part of yourself, like there's this process of understanding or tuning into whose voice is this? Is another question, because some of it is not even things that were said to you, it's how the parent felt about themselves and you witnessed that. So say there is a parent there that had, body image issues and were thinking about themselves. They would have said so many things about themselves. Sometimes that, and often that's projected onto the child, and they want the child to then also, because they see the child as an extension of themselves and therefore a source of approval or rejection within those around them, that may get projected onto the child, but it doesn't even have to. It could just be what the parent was saying, oh no, I've put on weight since such and such, and oh, I can't go out because of my flabby arms or my jowly face or whatever it is. These things just get absorbed by being in the environment, even if it wasn't directed at you. So so much is happening there. Now, just to the parents listening, that feels like a really kind of weighty environment because, it feels like an unobtainable ideal to parent in a way that supports the child's highest evolution. But all you have to do is remember that whatever you are doing is at least 100 times better in most cases than what your parents were doing. And so you're doing your best. You don't have to be perfect, but we have a better knowledge now. We have better tools. So we're able to understand the impact of trauma. We're able to take more responsibility, realizing as a parent, how I show up, how I am is going to impact the children. I can't just abdicate that and be like, okay, children do this and I'm going to do this over here. And it's okay if I'm stressed to the nines because that's, as long as I just tell them to be calm and to, go to sleep on time, it's all going to be fine. We know that doesn't work. So that's why, all of you are here listening, taking responsibility, taking care of your own consciousness state. But yes, it's all of those things. So the thing is that what can happen, one of the storylines we can get attached to is, I'm like this because my parent was like that. And there's still a bit of resentment there and clinging on to the blame storyline. So now, because we have so much understanding of stress and trauma and all those things, we can get a bit hooked on the understanding, but not actually transcending, going beyond that storyline altogether. That's where we want to get to. We don't want to hold on to the blame and, oh, my mum, she did this and that, and parenting in the 80s was a nightmare, and, why didn't they do better? And, oh, well, I'm just like this because of that. Okay, good. Now what? Do you want to stay like that? That's your choice. That's your choice. You're not being parented anymore. We have the total capability within ourselves to transcend any storyline that we find not to be life-affirming, expansive, not to be serving us. But it's going to take letting go of blaming the parents. The parents were simply a product of their upbringing. If you look at their upbringing or just cast your mind on what that would have been like, like my dad told me, he was never told he was loved, ever. That is the type of upbringing that they had. How can you expect someone who's had that kind of upbringing to then, be something wildly opposite to that? It sometimes happens. Sometimes that drives you to really, become the opposite of what you had as a child. But there would have to be some kind of process involved there, some kind of work, some kind of self-awareness, some kind of counseling, therapy, whatever it might be. So all we have to do is think about what were they experiencing, and they did the best that they could. Maybe their best wasn't what you hoped for. And there is a certain stage in the beginning, stages where you're becoming aware of your trauma and the source of that trauma, where you will naturally be a bit angry, where you might take some space from a parent for a wee while or just pull back a little bit. And that's natural, just as you process and then are able to come back from a more clear state. But we can't get hooked into that storyline of, oh, my mum did this, my mum did that. It's not serving you. It's already happened. We have to come to acceptance that. And again, that knowledge of we came here to experience a certain amount of stress, to complete karmic assignments, to push us onto the path of greater evolution. The greater the challenge, the greater the victory. So nature has this process of squeezing us down so that we can pop out bigger and more expanded and more connected than we ever would have if we got the sort of ideal childhood that we're thinking that we wanted. So we have to also let go of that storyline, that victim. We're playing a little bit of the victim there. And the victim game is a trap, because it keeps you stuck in that storyline, and you can then say, oh yeah, and commiserate with friends like, yeah, oh God, my parents did this, my parents that. You can talk about it in a clear way, like these are kind of the things that were going on, but you'll find people that have really transcended it don't spend much time talking about that, because the storyline's not even active anymore. They've transcended it all. So this is the invitation to the next level, becoming aware, very good, having an understanding. Maybe you've done talk therapy and worked around that, but now we have to get to the point where we go beyond it. We can't let even the storyline of my mother and my father, yes, there are a lot of things, I know a lot of you have dealt with, things that really hurt, but do you want to stay hurt? And this comes to that piece of asking yourself, how is it serving me to hold on to this storyline? Because there has to be some part of you that's holding on to it. And it can be, like I mentioned, the part that just is so bought into the idea, but it can also be subtly serving the ego in some way. If I hold on to the storyline, I get to keep complaining. I get to keep getting a sort of subtle form of attention from people that I'm talking to, or I don't really have to step up and show up for myself in life, because I can just continue to hold that storyline of, oh no, well, I couldn't do that because of my upbringing. That may not even be the way that you're talking about it, but that could be subtly there. And whatever reason that you have, that you find, or that in fact is there, that's serving you to hold on to it, it's going to be cringy. Just let me tell you now. It is not going to be a part of you that you like. But we have to have that radical courage to look, because to be free, we have to look. We can't be free of anything that we're not willing to look at. So if we want to play the avoidance game, sure, but that circuitry is just going to keep ruling and ruling and ruling. So instead, we have the courage to look and see from my ego structure, how's this serving me? Like, I think I've shared this before, but one thing that I realized when I was really working through, why did I get cancer from every level, from the physical to the emotional to the mental, the energetic, the spiritual, all angles? I ended up without a plan. It just sort of happened. And through this process of really radically looking at myself, I realized that there was a part of me that was kind of being served by getting sick and being weak. I was getting attention. I was getting attention from that. And something that I learned as a child through perhaps at times, or a lot of the time, not getting much attention from parents who were busy and stressed and things like that, or weren't able to connect in certain moments. If I got sick, I would get some attention. Now, every parent has probably seen a child play this game, one or two times. But when it becomes a coping mechanism, and it's not a comfortable truth to admit to yourself. It's not a comfortable truth to admit to others, but I'm sharing this here because I want you to understand that we will all have a cringy reason of why we're holding on to a particular storyline. I wanted to be badly out of the health storyline of creating reasons to get sick or to be exhausted, or I had chronic fatigue for years and years. So to work through that, I had to really see what part of me is being served by this. I can choose to be out of this. And there's certain cosmic timing that comes along where, as part of the picture, you're not going to be free of everything at once. But if you're willing to look, if you're committed, if you can hold the possibility that you can be free of it, then that absolutely is available to you. When you think you can't be free of it, then expectation creates reality. Then I can't be free of it. And I'm bound to continue to play this storyline out and continue creating the conditions where that storyline will play out. So on a health perspective, you'll end up not doing the things, not taking the herbs, not taking the advice. This is where people, get sicker and sicker. And yet they could have just changed one or two lifestyle things. They're unwilling to do it. Why? Because of this. There's something that I don't really have to show up in life. Maybe I'm afraid of failure. And if I'm afraid of failure and I'm sick, then I don't ever really have to try because I'm too sick to do that. And so then I'm too tired to do that. So it takes a lot of courage, but the spiritual path does take courage, but also the reward is so much greater.
If you're loving Unbound and would like to tap in a little deeper, My membership-based Pocket Guru is your ideal next step. It's super accessible, daily wisdom notes dropping into your pocket via WhatsApp Monday to Friday, but just 15 to 20 minutes of audio. Like a mini pod, but more intimate. Hear how this wisdom really comes to life in the context of real life niggles. Ask your questions anonymously, listen on the go, and join a vibrant community of over 200 members. I'd love to see you inside via the link in the show notes or via my Instagram bio @GVMeditation.
Yeah. I'm thinking about one more little reflection that I had was when you were talking about imagining how it would feel if you didn't have this storyline playing out and what that would how expansive that would feel. And that's such a intentionally conscious act to do that, because I think if you're we're unconsciously, consciously but not intentionally predicting what's happening next in our future, because that's what the brain does. It's constantly trying to predict, but only based on the evidence that it's gathered from the past. So then if you don't intentionally do that, it's easy just to project something that's really not that much better, or more of the same. And it's that's the information that I've got. And so therefore that's what you're going into. But of course that never plays out. It doesn't ever play out like you feared or, like you just predicted like that. But then to really intentionally put some effort into going, imagine what that feels like and allowing yourself to have some experience, some kind of physical, emotional experience of that, then you're starting to rewrite and kind of relay, what the brain can draw upon as well.
Yeah, and it's a consciousness stretch, right? So your consciousness might be based in, a certain amount of expectation of disappointment. Maybe that's also part of the storyline, is that you've experienced a lot of disappointment. The original disappointment is that your parents didn't love you the way that you came with an expectation of that big, bright soul, the innocent child, to be loved. That's true of a lot of people because of the type of parenting, the type of upbringings that we had, the stress levels, the lack of understanding, all of the things, the lack of support for women, the abdication of emotional availability of men, so many things going on. So that's the original disappointment. So there's often quite a lot of disappointment there. Not for some people did have, a more connected childhood. Maybe they don't have the disappointment storyline. And you'll find that those people tend to naturally go towards challenge, naturally step outside of the box. They have a certain level of confidence. And then that, of course, creates a certain level of circumstances for them in life because they have an expectation that they're going to be loved, that they're going to be accepted, that it'll be okay if they, fall over and get back up. So they've built that through, and that's why the formative years are important, but we can shift that at any time. So what we're doing with this creating the possibility is stretching the consciousness. So the consciousness has a range of expectation, and we're taking it further than that by asking the mind and consciousness to go beyond what is my known range into a higher possibility that I haven't yet even conceived of. And by taking my awareness there, now that I can feel it, the feeling is important. The feeling state is creative. Now that I can feel it, guess what? It's already here. Because what is that feeling? You're already at that state. When you feel it, what it would feel like, yes, it's not baked in. Yes, it's not habitual. Yes, we have to still continue to work to override the system's habit of dropping to what is more comfortable. But if we can feel it, we already have it. And when you know you can already have it, it's kind of like, okay. If I can have that, then this is just a case of, because now our brain is the servant of that intention, is the servant of that possibility. It's now realizing and creating solutions and different styles of behavior, and even the choice to do the inner work in that moment is coming from that higher state because you've taken your awareness there. So it's really valuable to have these conscious triggers that you're working with to invite yourself into that higher state and to work in that way with yourself, because you will just blast through so many limitations and find yourself doing things that you never would have done a month before. I've had situations where I've worked through some layer within myself, which I'm doing all the time. It's still daily. It's almost instantaneous. It happens by itself because that process, the choice to go towards it is so baked in that my system just can kind of drop there. Sometimes it happens in meditation as well without me intending to, because the practice with Vedic meditation is you're not going in with any intention, but spontaneously things, because my consciousness is in that expanded state, it's so habituated to working with like that, it just does it and it flies out. And then I'll look back at a text sequence or something that I had with someone, or, I'll look back at, I don't know, a Hinge chat, and I'll be like, wow, I took what they said completely differently and responded based on what circuitry I was running at the time. Especially if a lot of time's gone by, if it's been a year or 2 years, whatever, you will see the pattern there. You'll be like, wow, that's not what they were saying at all. The clarity, that's not what they were intending. Look at my response. The clarity has shifted so much. So that gives you really a roadmap, a road marker for the type of leap in consciousness that you've had. As Einstein said, problems cannot be solved from the level of consciousness that created them, which is why it's important to have conscious practices. It's important to be receiving wisdom like this that expands you, and also a practice directly, mechanically expanding consciousness, because that is also a natural process that's happening and taking place, whereby you start to spontaneously have thoughts like, oh, what if I was free of this? It can just come to you. And then the space, when we're stressed and full of stress, and the mind is full of stress and just that urgency rushing around, there's no room to expand into a higher state. It's too crowded. So mechanically creating the space means you'll just go faster. Yes, you can do it without that, but it's going to be a longer process. It's going to be much slower. And the people that meditating regularly, they're just accelerating. You see them again in a few months and you're like, wow, because your mind is still expecting, right, the previous version of them. Meditators report this all the time, where they've changed something inside of themselves, but the family is still expecting them to show up and have the same reaction. And they're almost a bit like, whoa, why isn't he or she flying off the handle or getting defensive or saying the thing or not doing the thing? And they're just showing up and being helpful and pleasant and non-reactive, not all the time, but, progressively in that direction. And the family members are like, wow, because they have obviously are habituated to a certain version of you. So they also have to adjust to that new version all the time. But someone who's practicing regularly, who's expanding consciousness, is going to continue to be showing up as a newer and more evolved version rapidly all the time. It doesn't end. It's infinite, that process.
Sorry, I just had to hang up on Mum. She was calling. Let's talk about the things that you shouldn't have said when I was young.
How timely.
Are you calling to apologise?
I think I just created that reality. What would it feel like if my mother called to apologise? But that actually brings me to a story that someone in Pocket Guru shared with me recently, because we've had a few, obviously a topic that comes up quite often is, relationship with the mother. And we've had a few that, have messaged through and I've given some advice on that. And someone said, I didn't even say anything to her, but I shifted internally to how I felt about her. I had let go of the resentment. I'd found a certain amount of compassion. I'd realized that she was, reacting and responding from the best place that she knew how. And the mother just spontaneously, unexpected out of the blue, apologized for something that she had let go of the chance of ever getting an apology from or about. She wasn't asking for it. She hadn't even had a conversation about it. And out of the blue, the mother apologizes. That is what can happen when we create that potentiality within ourselves after that, because ultimately it's when we've let go that it creates the space for a different outcome to come. When we're still gripping on, it means we're also holding on to the resentment and the anger and all of that. And so because she'd let go of that, the mother probably felt an opening in her system that then triggered an opening in her that allowed her to respond in a different way. And she said, that was just so healing and so amazing. And she couldn't have got there without that wisdom that had helped her shift her internal state. So it's really powerful.
So then you don't have to force the external, because, one, I guess you let go of the attachment of something happening that you then think will make you feel a certain way about it. But yeah.
We don't get there through controlling the external circumstances. Firstly, we can't make a person do anything. You already know that. You've tried so many times to get people to do different things, and they don't do it. If they do it, they do it, and then they just revert back to their baseline. So it's not really, they're doing it sometimes because you ask them, or they don't want to get in trouble, or they want to people please. They're not doing it because it's come from a genuine place, whereas this came from that genuine place. So when we understand the spiritual mechanics, that this whole baseline of the universe is available within us, this is the concentration of universal capacity in your storyline, is within your own system, within your own consciousness. So what you do there will be reflected as within, so without. So as within, when there's an opening, a letting go, an acceptance, a compassion, then that is vibrating. So yeah, I just worked with a client last week who was talking about a certain relationship with her mother, and she's got some anger there. She's like a lot of resentment. And so they go in and they butt heads, and there's this defensiveness.
So one thing that I was thinking about was that the last time that I got triggered and activated and I was in this sort of situation, it was yesterday actually.
Totally.
So timely. So now I know why it happened. Like, what convenience. It was worth the tears. Anyway, I did have that moment where there was kind of a bit of space between everything, because once I peeled back the layers of what I thought I was upset about, it came back again to the underlying mixtape of I'm not enough. And I just realized that, like, sometimes you put it in a different cassette cover and you pretend it's something else than it actually is. But so then when I got down there, I was like, wait. We intellectually understand this isn't true, but we haven't fully embodied this understanding. But just even knowing that, no, intellectually we know this is not true, create that little bit of space. But it starts with this like upswell of emotion, painful emotion, and then that sort of like you whole triggered into that whole physical, emotional experience of, whatever's going on once you're activated. And then I could feel the story wanting to take hold and wanting to get into the emotion of it all. But then I also had another kind of moment of choice where once I'd realised, okay, that's that old story and we don't subscribe to that. Well, not on every level, but, on some levels we don't subscribe to that.
Choosing not to.
We're choosing not to.
In this moment. Yeah.
Right? Then I was still like, well, okay, I've got some choices to make here, but I also have a lot of emotion that I'm dealing with. And I need to process the emotion, but I also need to choose not to wallow in the emotion. So there's that kind of choice of like how then you're going about dealing with the activation that you've got and the emotion that you've got, and then how then you're choosing how to support yourself next and the choices that you make next to bring yourself out of it. So yeah, I sort of wanted to you to speak to that a little bit, because then where there are gaps, there are choices. You're still having an emotional experience in that moment, and you still have been triggered, and you don't want to beat yourself up for the fact that the triggers are still there, and sometimes you get activated.
And even the word still, I wouldn't use that, because that implies that there's an issue with the experience that you're having, and you're just at a particular stage of evolution. When we see everything that's arising in our experience as an opportunity for more love, for more growth, to see that where there are still opportunities for healing, which is a good thing. It's a positive still in that case, because it's like, yes, great. Now I've been shown that this is an area where if I heal that, I'm also ultimately going to be feeling more love. So it's a very loving thing for nature, for the universe to show you, hey, this is still actually in your system, because we like to think, no, I'm all healed and it's all done and that storyline's done. And it's like, well, is it? And perhaps in this circumstance, and it gets subtler and subtler. And there's a lot of power of working with the subtle triggers. Like, it's very obvious when you have the big activation, but it's very powerful also just to see, once you have that baseline of more expansion, more joy, a general, peacefulness that you're experiencing all the time, when there's a slight contraction, you might think, oh, well, I don't need to deal with that because it's not really impacting my experience that much. But that work, it starts to get more subtle. So when you tune into that, there's a subtle, and if you feel like, oh, what was the shift? And it's like, oh, interesting. It was that thing that happened, or that text, or that reminder that happened through something someone said, and it's not really impacting you much. So you could easily miss it, but working with those also really powerful. But to your point, when we get activated and that emotional response is there, it's the inner child that's really come online. It's overtaken the adult self. It's overtaken the logical version of you with this activation of essentially the inner child is there. The small version of you is online, the 2, 5, 7-year-old you, which is like, this is happening. Oh, I'm scared. It's literally you are back in that moment. Your awareness, your senses, everything is back there at the original time of the trigger. So part of not identifying with the storyline is not getting caught up in the he said, she said, whatever it might be. That can really delay things as well, going on and on and on. This is where some of this question came from, is the spiraling that we can go into and like trying to figure it all out mentally. But figuring it out mentally is not the pathway to healing. That just delays it. We have to go first to the source. So if you dive straight into that 2, 5-year-old version of you, just through intention, by checking in on what part of me originally absorbed this, what part of me is hurting, what small part of me, when did I first feel like this? That's a really good question to ask. And you will then access the source stress. And if you give the love there, you give the encouragement, the reassurance, the higher wisdom that you weren't able to give yourself at the time because you were a child and that the parents weren't necessarily giving, then the emotion comes down immediately. It's not going to come down through mental planning, strategizing, going over what they said, what happened. That is, the stress trigger is active, and then the mind is just entertaining with it at the surface level. And we are really stuck in the story then. Not just the underlying storyline, but the time-bound storyline, which is, you know, this person rejected me, or this person cheated on me, or this person did this. It doesn't mean that we don't have relevant action to take. We absolutely do. But first, we have to go in and soothe that part of us that's activated. And that is the part. So when we drop in there, you'll find it's faster. It's more effective. Then the trigger comes down more quickly, because what are you seeking? Why are you freaking out? There is reassurance needed, but not at the mental level, at the emotional, heart-based level of that small child. It's wanting to be held. And what do we want in those moments? We want someone to just hold us and to tell us it's all going to be okay. But we can give that to ourselves in any moment. And what is that? It's love. It's love. It's holding space for. It's giving soma, the flow of conscious attention to that part of you. But going to the actual source is going to be so much more powerful. The subtler we work, the more powerful it is. We know that the universe itself is more powerful at subtler layers. That's where we get to nuclear power. It's subtler. It's at the subtler stratum of existence. So like that, the more subtle our work is, just mentally thinking about it, not a lot is happening there. Useful, but more useful after we've tended to that underlying trigger at the subtle value. Then emotions come down, then we've got more space. Now is the time where we can start thinking cognitively about what action might be required. What do I need to share with that person? Maybe this is just a trigger that's based on my own perception, based on my stress triggers, and there's actually nothing to say. They have every right to say what they've said. But if we get stuck in the storyline, we could be like, oh, screw them. Why'd they say that? They're always like, oh, why do I always have these people in my life that say this kind of thing? Why can't I ever find just blah, blah, blah? This is all just chatter. That chatter is based on the feeling. When we heal the feeling, the chatter comes down. Then we can see the clarity. Okay, I need to, speak to that person and say that it hurt me. And we can own that part of it is to do with our own stress and triggers, but we can also say, but it would support our relationship if you can communicate about this, if you can, or that was really out of line and I'm not up for that kind of behavior at all. But then it's not clouded by what part is the reaction based on the trigger, and then we're able to communicate more clearly. We can be heard and received more by the partner because we're speaking with the full picture online, which is I'm aware that some of this is my own, but at the same time, this is a sensitive point for me, and what I'm looking for in relationship is someone that is able to be aware of that part of me, and then for me to offer that back to them as well. So initially, the first stages of this is that you're having the trigger, But now you're able to not act on the trigger. So you're not just unconsciously projecting your anger or your stress or your fear or trying to control the other person. This can also be a false finish line with this, where you understand what your triggers are, so your anxious attachment or something, and then you're like, well, what I need you to do is like reassure me all the time, or send me a message and let me know when you leave the supermarket and when you're going to be home, and too much, it gets exhausting. So that is not taking full responsibility. Full responsibility is soothing the anxious part and also communicating with the partner within a reasonable limit of like, hey, if I don't hear from you for a whole day, that's going to be too much for me, but not every hour and every movement of their day. And to hold a bit of space when perhaps something came up for them in that moment, we don't try to get it from the person. We self-manage based on the reality of what the situation is. Probably they had something come up, they got caught up in something, and they weren't able to let you know what was happening in that moment. Now, we don't want it to be an ongoing pattern with lots of lack of communication, but the balance has to be there. So initially we get to this point where we're able to be aware the trigger is there, that pattern is not fully resolved, but it's getting less and less strong. Even the fact that you can see it and not act from that place and not do the thing you want to do, which is run, hide, eat a whole tub of ice cream, break up with the person, get angry, project your anger, whatever it might be. You are activated, you're aware, you've got a lot going on in your system, and you make a relevant choice for yourself, which is I'm going to step away, or I'm going to process this. You get to the point where you can process it in the moment while the person is speaking, and try and hold more of adult self online and not shrink back to the childlike version of you. That sort of feeling you can get where you're like a rabbit in headlights and you feel almost frozen and you've got that fear or shock inside of you, that abandonment trigger is really online or whatever it might be. You're literally 2 at that time. You're literally 3. You can't even speak. You've got no words. That's not the adult version of you. That's the child that was stuck in that state so often that it became habitual. And the easiest, old slipper pathway is to go into that. But can we be aware, that is active right now? Can I, support myself on the inner plane? Like this sense of almost holding that child's hand and saying, it's okay, it's safe now. We've chosen this person. This is a safe person. If that is the case. If it's not, then other action needs to be taken. And this is not my mother, this is not my father, and separating from that and allowing yourself to hold more. It's a percentages game. Hold more of your adult self online in these moments where previously you might have gone into a full tailspin about it. So that is all progress, and we want to really honor that. That's beautiful, because these are not easy patterns to come out of. If we're dedicated, if we have that possibility, then it can transform quite quickly in some cases, depending on where you're at and how much space you can hold in your awareness. But it's a lot of progress not to be acting on it. And that is where a lot of the population is unconscious, reacting, projecting, no awareness around their own stress and triggers, no capacity to make a different choice in that moment. So that is a huge advancement, a huge step forward. And we just love ourselves through all the stages. That's ultimately that more love, not even thinking still, just no reaction, absolute neutrality. Oh, interesting. Curiosity, compassion. Oh, this is showing up. Oh, what I need is more love. It's okay, and you love your child part, that childlike part of yourself through it. And eventually that child becomes and swells up into an embodiment of the adult self. And there's no contraction into the child at all, or very rarely. So we're going to see reduction in intensity. We're going to see percentage growth to the capacity to hold adult self online. We're going to see less frequency. We're going to see less intensity of the reaction. All of those things are going to be markers of progress. And we want to be process orientated. That is, universe is process orientated. It's in the moment, experiencing everything moment by moment by moment. And then we live a very rich and full and present life where we're not constantly trying to get away. Oh, I need to be fixed. I'm broken. I've got to get away from this. Yes, there's discomfort. But if we're not afraid of discomfort, if we know that it's a signal, actually, in that moment, a higher possibility is being created. A higher possibility is online. If you choose to go towards rather than against, reject, avoid, distract yourself from the feeling, do all the other things, go out and work, run, eat, drink, whatever it might be, all of those distraction methods. And sometimes we don't have time in the moment. We can catch up later. You can do it at any time, in the evening, in the weekend. If we don't do all of those things, then we can claim that higher possibility in that moment. It's a loving act. So it's just simply, it's not good, bad, or otherwise. It's just what is. This is here now. This is on my timeline. This is the need of the time. It's so much more important than more emails. It's so much more important than another run. It's so much more important than scrolling Instagram. You can tap into more love. The result of that is going to be. And it feels uncomfortable because we got to feel the things we don't want to feel. But when we realize, it's a beautiful teaching that comes through the Upanishads, the Vedic Upanishads, which is if we turn towards the poisons, they become pleasures. And if we turn towards the pleasures, they become poisons. And it means if we turn towards, in this instance, we turn towards what feels uncomfortable, the shadow, it gets elevated into light. But if we avoid it and go down the pleasure path, which is hedonism, which is, only wanting to be comfortable, which is, I'll eat the thing, I'll drink the thing, I'll just stay in the substance game, then the pleasures themselves turn into poisons. They start polluting the system, too much of that and not enough of the actual work that's needed. So when we turn towards discomfort, it's so powerful that the alchemical process that can happen. We have to get comfortable with feeling. And so that might be even speaking to that childlike part of you. It's okay, it's safe to feel this now. You're not in that chaotic environment where it was too stressful at the time to feel anything because you're constantly being told, be quiet, don't cry, whatever it might be, shut up, don't get angry, stop that. It's just suppression of the emotional self. So can you hold space for yourself? And then as a parent, if you are a parent, you can only hold space for your child's emotions to the degree you can hold space for your own emotions. So it's got to start with you, as within, so without. So once you are comfortable with your own emotional state, holding space for it, not needing to rush yourself or get away from it or just be done with that, which again, we're like, whose voice is that? It's usually one of the parents. That's how they spoke to us, or that's how they spoke to themselves or in the environment. When we can hold space and we've got all the time in the world, then that's what we're going to be able to offer our children as well. But if we're not yet able to get to that place with our children, then the first port of call is within ourselves. It's like, oh, okay, that means I've got some more opportunity. Don't use that as a reason to shame yourself if you're starting to hear that and be like, oh God, that's me. No, it's like, yes, here's an opportunity. I get to feel more love. If I practice that, if I turn towards myself, the result will be I feel more love and therefore I'm more loving. We can't be loving if we can't experience love inside. So it's very powerful and it's so simple. It's actually way simpler than look at the alternative. Okay, I feel something. What I'll do is I'll avoid that feeling for as long as possible. Walk, run, I'll, work myself into the ground, just keep busy, active, keep my mind full of content all the time so I never have to face anything, never stop, never sit still. It's exhausting. And all that's happening is reinforcement, building more and more and more, stacking up inside. And that's why we see a lot of people in their wisdom years, they're getting more bitter, they're getting more rigid, more stuck in their ways, more sensitive. That is not the possibility. That is not what the Vedas expound for. The wisdom years is wisdom. The more wisdom we have, the more elevated our experience because we're not so caught up in the everyday yes or no, up or down. It's like wise. The wise one has all the time in the world. The wise one knows that eventually everything changes. The wise one knows we always are going to have to ultimately let go. The wise one's not caught up in the circumstances and so therefore enjoying life. It's just like people say, 50's the new 40, 40's the new 30. Why? Because of wisdom. It's not, you don't look any better. But when you're attached to beauty as the source of happiness and worth and value, which is, so true for women particularly, most value the best years of your life are when you're young, when you're childbearing, when you're attracting partners, all of that, you're attractive to the opposite sex or the sex that, you want to be attractive to. That is not the best years of your life. There's so much insecurity, there's so much fear, there's not enough wisdom. Once the wisdom's online, that's where you really start living. So we can access that wisdom earlier and earlier now, but also the opportunity is if we keep doing this process of turning towards, the wisdom years are very expansive. I see people in my community that are in their mid 50s plus 60s, even early 70s. They're doing new things. They're trying new things. Some of them starting businesses again, traveling, doing all kinds of things that they never would have done before. And that's not expected of someone of that age necessarily. And so that is because of the freshness of their consciousness state, of the processing of not everything getting more and more baked in. So if we don't want that to be the outcome, then the opportunity is actually being given moment by moment by moment. Nature's offering so many opportunities for you to live the highest, which is wisdom, expansion, joy, freedom, inner freedom, totally undervalued.
That's good. That's good, Georgia.
Getting unbound?
Yeah, I am getting unbound. And I was just thinking, when a trigger happens and you have to make that choice of what your response is going to be to yourself in that moment, that first really intentional choice is not to react to yourself with frustration, rejection, sometimes even embarrassment, humiliation, but to, react with compassion and love and build that muscle in that space.
Yeah, it's a muscle. It's a response that you build towards yourself through turning towards it and versus against. And if you look back, you'll see that is the way you treat yourself is how you were treated as a child. You were rushed. You were told to stop. You were, too much. Emotions were scary, all of that. So even seeing through that storyline of the need to continue to treat yourself, and they're probably likely others and on occasion, because the way we treat ourselves often will flow into other areas of life, then that's an opportunity as well. And I think for me, that's one of the first things that I started working on was a lot of compassion. Everything that I felt, every state that I was in, all those years where I couldn't do a lot of things because of chronic fatigue, or I was physically genuinely unwell, I had to just let go of any expectation and the shoulds and the judgment and what everyone else was doing, and just turn towards a lot of compassion and be like, okay, this is today, and we're just going to, and I just, walked myself through it. And it developed a compassion muscle where that voice in my head, the way I speak to myself is not harsh at all. It's not even really there. It's just immediately into loving process. So that can be trained for sure. It's a muscle.
And then the stories that we tell ourselves, I think I saw on maybe some kind of meme where it was instead of imagining, what's the worst that could happen, imagine what's the best that could happen. Can you build that muscle into kind of eternal optimism and positivity, and have a response that is, I'm not enough to, I don't know, what is the thing?
Yeah, if you're continually practicing to move towards a higher potentiality, what would it look like if? Is a really good question. What would it look like if? So say you're thinking, I was working with a client last week who is having a major surgery coming up, a hysterectomy, and her mother had the same surgery and had a really difficult outcome with it. And so, of course, she's got a lot of fear going into that surgery. And then, I said, well, firstly, we have to separate the storylines. That's her storyline, and you are choosing and creating your storyline right now. Letting go of attachment to outcome, trusting you will deal with whatever comes. But I said, what would it look like for you if this went, and I just started to speak into it, if this went just as easily, the surgeon comes out and says, it just absolutely, all went the best possible outcome, and you recover really quickly, and it goes on to resolve all of the underlying health issues that you have come into the surgery for. I said, feel that, and then spend a lot of time in the coming week and weeks putting your attention on that feeling of instead of, because also what you put attention on grows. We know this from the universal mechanics. So where are you putting your attention? If your attention is, we have to become aware of this. Our consciousness is currency. It carries power, especially the more expanded it is, it actually carries more power. So your creative capacity there is even stronger. So I feel like we could do a whole podcast on that on its own, but you want to be putting your attention on that which you want to create. So asking yourself, is this what I want to experience? And the answer will often be no, I don't want the worst case scenario. The mind is obsessed that it has to think through the worst case scenario to stay safe. But if we realize that's not needed, so maybe giving a little bit of reassurance, strengthening the inner child in that moment, it's all going to be okay. You can get through anything, that kind of strengthening narrative that's replacing the underlying fear, that is giving the reassurance that they didn't receive at that time, and then moving towards the putting your attention on the possibility and strengthening it's like a flower. You want to water it and water it and water it lots of the time, creating to give yourself the best possibility. But if it should not go that way, you also know you have infinite capacity to meet the need of the time, but may as well give yourself the best possible chance at the best possible outcome. And when we understand spiritual mechanics, that doesn't seem like a woo-woo waste of time. We understand we are creative beings. We are creating our experience all the time. So then it makes absolute sense to spend time doing that. And there are studies that show this. Sports people, high-performing professionals have a regular visualization practice of visualizing. They're not visualizing, what if I win the race? What if I lose the race? What if I break a leg? They're visualizing the entire race, every single aspect of it, what it feels like to win, what it feels like afterwards, because you've drawn that potential towards yourself. It's vibrating with you. It sits naturally within you. Even if we refer back to last episode about me getting the money back on the flights, like that possibility was alive in me. I could feel without resistance what it feels like to have had all that money come back. So as I said to her, I spoke that into existence for her and encouraged her into that higher opportunity for her surgery outcome. Then her whole energy shifts. She's like, I can feel that. I actually know people who have had this kind of result, my other sister. So it was just her attention. So you shift that, and suddenly the mind is finding evidence for the higher possibility and building and reinforcing that.
Yeah. That's really good. And if you notice yourself having a, positive thought about your capability, for example, or how well you did at something, that kind of popped up on its own, should you double down and be like, yeah, I am really good at that? To reinforce the fact that there's a part of you that has integrated these positive stories about yourself already.
And it's also a really good marker, my mind and my awareness is entrained in moving in the direction of life affirming, in the direction of compassion and inspiration and cheering myself on. And so that shows you that there is capacity within you to do that. Then we have to see, why am I not doing it in certain moments? And that's going to come down to strong storylines, narratives that we need to work on.
Yeah. It's really good. I'm unbound.
I just wait for the moment where you say I'm unbound, and I'm like, okay, we've explored that topic. But we would love to hear from you if you're listening and you're like, oh, what about this? What about that? Feedback, how this is landing for you, what it's changing in you. We'd love to hear that. DM us or send us an email at info@gvmeditation.com. And also, if you want to hear about something, let us know. These are really powerful conversations. We'd love for you to share this episode. If you can think of one person that this might land with, hit that share button now. It really supports us on the show. And also, we want this knowledge to reach as many people as possible. Let's all get unbound together.
Amazing. Thank you, Georgia.
Thanks, Hannah. We'll see you all soon.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for getting unbound with us today. We'd so appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave us a review and to share this episode with anyone who you think could benefit. It helps us to keep these conscious conversations flowing. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. See you next week.